Yellow and red mixed by Digits 27. Epilogue. Uncle skips through the streets of Konoha with what some people might call a slightly manic grin, and she made sure to direct this look on anybody and everyone who crossed her path. And she was definitely in a good mood today. She didn't really know why. It might have been the recent slew of interesting A-rank missions she had been getting, or perhaps it was because Hana had asked her to be her maid of honor, and she didn't really care. All she knew was that she was happy. She was happy. Those occurrences were too rare in her book to be wasted pondering. Her grin diminished slightly as she looked up at the Hokage monument, noticing a lone figure standing atop the head of the Yondam Hokage. She couldn't make out any features except the long billowing coat that they wore, maybe because the sun was behind them, making the Jonin cover her eyes with a hand. For a moment, she could have sworn the man was smirking in her direction, but before she could get any closer, he vanished. And just like that, in that brief instant, she swore she could have seen a mop of sun-kissed blonde hair. She shook her head, wondering if she had been out in the sun for too long. Before remembering what she was doing, her grin returned as she quickly took off in the direction of the Inuzaka compound. It wasn't every day she got to be a bridesmaid to her best friend. May sighed as she leafed through the other stack of documents idly, not really focusing on what she was reading. It was mostly senseless drivel about this mission or that, and she didn't care too much as long as they were completed successfully without many problems. She groaned as she leaned back in the chair, and she really needed a day off or something. The last time she had been able to really kick back and just enjoy herself was at Naruto's wedding. She smiled as she remembered the day fondly, and she peered out over her village, watching the sun reflect off the moisture covering the whitewashed buildings. And she peered a little closer, and she noticed a single man standing tall, high up on one of the buildings, just looking out over the village. And she couldn't make out any details, but he definitely caught her eye with his clothing blowing out in the wind like that. As quickly as she had noticed him, a cloud passed over the sun, briefly darkening the village for just a moment. When it passed, he was gone, as if he had never been there in the first place. May just blinked as she leaned back even further into her chair, and she really needed a drink. Yuto slid underneath another of B's attacks, bringing her body down low to the ground before springing back up to wrap around the larger man's neck. She was swiftly backhanded away before doing any actual damage, but before he could fully recover, she was on him again. A flurry of lightning fast punches and kicks. B dodged or parried all of it with the face of one of his swords before grabbing one of Yuto's overextended arms, quickly throwing her across the plateau to impact it painfully with a boulder. You gotta be faster than that, little miss, too. Or the mighty Killer Bee will always beat you. Yeah! The blonde just stood up with a smirk on her face before both Jinchuriki raised an eyebrow, turned their heads to where they felt the familiar chakra signature, both smirking lightly as they gazed up at the mountain they were training under, just watching a glimpse of red and yellow before it vanished, taking the familiar presence with it. So it's that time of the year again, huh? And B just nodded with a small smile, his arms over his chest as he looked up from behind his shades. It would seem like it's time for a little nine. He was cut off before he could rap anymore, as Yuto promptly kicked him across the training ground. I gotta keep your guard up, B-sensei. A lone figure suddenly materialized atop a rooftop deep in Earth Country, standing easily with their arms crossed over their chest, their eyes narrowed briefly before softening as they took into the night above them, the stars shining in the cloudless sky. And then they sighed to themselves as they took in Iwagakure, harnessing its own rugged beauty with its rough-hewn buildings. It wasn't their favorite village of all time, but ever since Onoki had passed on the title of Tsuchikage, it had become more tolerable, dropping its inherited hatred for Konoha and its allies slightly. The two Chunin were out on the late shift, patrolling through the streets, boredom evident on their faces. It was the most pointless job in the elemental nations. The walls of Igakure were unbreachable, almost. In the history of the continent, only one man had ever breached the city, and he was dead. One of them suddenly stopped, and the cigarette in his mouth dropping to the ground as his mouth opened in surprise, pointing up at the rooftop. Hey, isn't that... His friend looked around and noticing noticing his friend shot off with an apathetic indifference. He just wanted the night to end. He didn't see anything up on the roof, so just quickly slapped his partner around the back of his head before walking on down the street. Shut up, you moron! Who the hell's gonna be out here at this time of night? You're probably just tired. The other tuning just blinked as he scrutinized the spot again. He was sure he had seen somebody, and not just anybody. He shook his head. It must have been exhaustion and boredom. There was no way it could be him anyway. No way. Kakashi jumped through the trees, only stopping when he finally came to the edge of the training ground. He was about to jump down until he spotted somebody else standing in his usual spot. Instantly, he recognized the long red coat and bright spiky blonde hair. He paused for a moment before turning around. He wouldn't want to interrupt somebody paying their respects. He could come back later. He chuckled, thinking it might be worth it to see the shock on people's faces when he actually showed up on time for once. Not to just stare down at the simple black polished stone in front of him, and the smallest of smiles on his face. He knelt down, placing the handful of flowers that he collected from all across the elemental nations down on the memorial, focusing on the three names in particular. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply for a moment before he felt a hand lightly rest on his shoulders. He stood back up, turned around to see his wife looking sadly down at the memorial. Come on, Naruto. Time to come home. The blonde just nodded with a sad smile as Tsuya wrapped her arms around him in a warm hug. They both disappeared, vanishing in an instant. The flower rested on the polished black marble, being the only indicator they were even there. Naruto and Taiya reappeared inside their home, still wrapped up in each other's arms until they heard a cough behind them. Naruto turned his head with a smirk as he saw Fu staring at the two of them, her arms under her chest, crossed over her jonin jacket. Good to see you back, Onisana. You know they were worried about you. As if on cue, Naruto spotted a blur of blonde suddenly run into the room, bowling him back as the yellow bullet crashed into him. Son, but he just chuckled as he stood back up, picking up his daughter as he did so. Hey, Konan-chan, you know you're getting a little older to be jumping into me like that. The 4-year-old just giggled as she wrapped her arms around her father's neck, shaking her head fiercely. Nuh-uh, Ta-san will always be there to pick me up. Naruto just chuckled but nodded all the same. Who was he to say no to his little girl? He was right though. He was right though. She was starting to get a little bigger, only 4 years old, and already she was becoming awkward to hold the way he used to. Her long, straight blonde hair fell in sheets around her round face, always trying to emulate her mother. The 3 whisker marks on either cheek, however, marked her as her father's little girl. You know you're going to have to get her out of that fucking habit sooner or later. They just turned around to the way with an amused expression, his eyebrows raised at his son. He didn't have to say anything though, as the Yo was quickly behind the 8-year-old, slapping around the back of his head. Arashi Uzumaki, you swear one more fucking time, and I'll get food to fly you up so high you won't be able to see the clouds. The boy turned pale a little bit before he could cough and nervously grumbled under his breath about a hypocritical mother's. Larry just smirked at the scene. It was the same thing almost every day. He was never happier than the day Arashi had been born, inheriting his father's spiky hair and his mother's color. However, his little sister had the 3 whisker marks on either cheek, clearly displayed his heritage to the world. Hey, Tao-san, you know when Nagato Oji-san is next coming over? He promised he'd teach me some awesome techniques. Naruto chuckled. He swore if Conan didn't keep his cousin on a tight leash, he would spoil Arashi rotten. That's something to do with being a true Uzumaki, which almost made Naruto grumble. No idea. Take it up with your aunt. Arashi smirked, nodding before he went back outside. No doubt to train. He had been trying to replicate the Rasengan for a few months now, and of course Naruto was no help, not wanting to ruin the feeling of working out a jutsu all on his own. He had caught Fu trying to give him pointers once, but he quickly sent her packing to Yukimaru for a while. If it involved training or jutsu, Arashi was all over it. Yet at the same time, he seemed to have taken up his mother's love of music with the right righteous passion, which is unfortunate when he would spend all night practicing. He carefully set Conan down, much to her displeasure. If her pouting features were anything to go on, it was lucky that he had slowly grown immune to what he had lovingly dubbed the puppy dog eyes jutsu, thanks to abusing it during her first pregnancy. Naruto suddenly shivered as he remembered back to those times. Sure, Taiyo was possibly happier than he had ever seen her, but she had moments, and that was all Naruto was willing to remember. Hey Tao-san, why you always gone this time every year? Not to look down at his daughter in mild surprise. For one so young, she was certainly turning out to be shrewd. He wondered briefly if she got that from her grandfather, but dismissed it as he knelt down. I was just visiting some very special people. Conan smiled brightly, a sight that would prove irresistible to even the most hardened of shinobi. Can I visit them too? Another smiled right back as he ruffled the top of her hair gently. Sure thing, but not right now. When you're older. Conan just grinned and nodded while Naruto chuckled. That was definitely one difference between his kids. Arashi would fight him tooth and nail over every little point, as stubborn as his mother, while Conan would accept everything. Then Naruto said, not that he lied to her or anything. He made sure that he never lied to his children about anything. He wouldn't have grown up the way he did, unless of course it was an unknown question. Then he would pass it off to Taiyo before vanishing for a few days with Gaara. He smiled as he thought of his friends. There was one who has taken to marriage life well, or at least Matsuri had made him take it to it well. Arashi and Ken were best friends, and outside of the academy, the pair were inseparable. If it kept up this way, he was going to have to recommend they be placed on the same gaining team. He was sure Gaara would agree. After all, besides Matsuri, he always took Naruto's opinions into consideration. Then again, he figured that was how it was supposed to be between Jonin Commander and their Kage. He watched as Conan ran off out the back door. She enjoyed watching Arashi train, knowing that it would be her as well one day. Naruto just stood back up, watching her run off with a smile as Fu walked over, leaning back against the edge of a table. So how was Iwa? Any trouble with Kurosachi? Naruto just smirked, and finally tearing his gaze away from his daughter to look at his sister, who she too had changed over the years. She was definitely taller, curvier too. Although Naruto didn't generally like to think about her that way. She had let her hair grow out a bit, still trying to make it spiky like his. Mostly unsuccessfully. It was almost a rare sight. Now to not see her flying through the village, swerving in between buildings. Nah, I don't think anybody even saw me. And even if they did, they wouldn't give me any trouble. Taiyo just smirked from behind him as she draped herself over his back. Yeah. Benefits of having a flea on site ordered directly from the Tsuchikage, huh? Naruto just chuckled. He didn't even know why he had that on his bingo book profile. Although those talks with Oniki to prove that he wasn't his father and his grandfather turns out to be exactly the same. Fu smiled as well, rolling her eyes back and forth. Playing Naruto's kids was just fun, but tiring. Yeah, being the second man to even receive an SS ranking might help just a little as well. Naruto just smiled and nodded. That had certainly been a surprise when he saw it. It also made him feel a little bit proud. He felt as though he was at least living up to his father's reputation, while at the same time he kind of hoped he wasn't casting too much of a shadow for his own son to follow in. He shrugged it off. He was training his son himself, and one day he knew Arashi would surpass him as well. At least until then, he could enjoy beating his son around the training field, all in good sport, of course. Well, it's been a long day, so Fuchus nodded kindly. I better get back to Yukimato anyways. Naruto waved her away as she took off into the fading sunlight, quickly lost amongst the twinkling stars. He felt the towel on his hand and looked around to see Taiyo grinning at him deviously. I hope you aren't too tired. I have plans, you know. A large grin broke out over Naruto's features as he swiftly picked his wife up bridal style, immediately flashing into the room before carefully laying her out on their bed. She just smiled seductively, tootling a strand of her hair and between her fingers in a way as she knew drove him mad. As if to punctuate that point, and Naruto quickly dived on her, shedding his clothes as he did so. Taiyo quickly got the message and began to pull off her own clothes, helped by Naruto where he could, and soon the two of them were lying next to each other completely naked. As Naruto began trailing soft kisses across Taiyo's body, the Reki could only moan her approval, at least after checking that the privacy seals were up. Naruto took her groans of pleasure as a sign his ministrations were working, and grinned as he continued to play with her nipple in between his teeth. He was about to stray lower when Tia grabbed his head, bringing him back up to face him as she planted a heated kiss on his lips. Not tonight, shithead. I need you right now. Naruto just smiled warmly, nodding as he readjusted his body, lining them up together. Tia gasped as she felt him sliding inside her, but quickly adjusted and began to move with him, getting the most out of his thirst. Naruto continued to kiss her when he could, on the lips, on her shoulder, just over the small blue diamond next to the spiral seal on her neck, a wedding gift from Tsunade. Finally, Taiyo screamed out, unable to hold it back any longer. She clamped down around Naruto. As he groaned in sync with her cry, they released together, and both left panting on the bed, wrapped in each other's arms. Naruto continued to plant light, fluttering kisses across his wife's body, while Tia tried to get her mind back from her post-orgasmic haze. Finally, her vision cleared, and she could look across at her husband with a smile. "Happy birthday, shithead!" The Blanche smiled as he fell back onto the comfortable bed, sighing happily. His life was just the way he always wanted it. He had a family, he had respect, he had a great friend, and best of all, he had a woman he loved lying next to him, sweetly but beautifully. He sat up quickly when he heard a knock on their bedroom door, frowning as he got up and threw on a robe. Dambu knew better than to see him for anything less than emergency today. Even so, he sighed and walked over, his eyebrow raised in surprise when he looked down at the mane of a long blonde hair before his daughter looked up at him with her piercing green eyes. "I couldn't get sleep." Naruto just smiled kindly down at her as he took her small hand, leading her into the room where Taiyo just watched the scene with amusement. "Was it the man in the orange mask again?" Conan just nodded, making Naruto sigh. He regretted telling her that story now. He should have known. He should have known it would give her nightmares. "All right, you can sleep with us tonight." Conan just gave him the biggest smile as she immediately shot across the room so fast. He feared she had somehow figured out his Fuji no Iki. Taiyo just laughed as she quickly pulled the daughter into a hug after making sure she was clothed, of course, wrapping up the little blonde with the bed covers. You know, I think you just make up these nightmares so you can sleep with Kasan and Taosan." Konan shook her head quickly, but both Naruto and Taiyo caught the small blush that found its way onto the bridge of her nose. Naruto just shrugged as he flashed over the bed, making his daughter giggle as he vanished, only to reappear behind her. "Well, I don't mind. It just means I get to spend more time with my little girl." Conan beamed before snuggling in between her parents, looking up at them both with wide eyes. "Can you tell me a story?" Naruto looked across at Taiyo, who simply shrugged, giving him a look that clearly said, "It's your turn." He sighed internally, but masked it with a kind smile as he pulled Conan in closer to him with one arm around the young girl's shoulders. You didn't always live in the Sand Village." Naruto just shook his head with an amused smile. "Are you going to let me tell the story?" The younger blonde quickly quieted down as she got more comfortable. "Well, you see, one day I was running, and the epilogue and the chapter."